Thank you. I call Mark Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just wanted to respond to a couple of the issues that have been raised, and the first one that I want to talk to is the issue that Mr Goff raised, because we did have quite lengthy discussion about this inside the Select Committee process. Firstly, I just want to say in relation to a Kiwi wanting to leave New Zealand to go and engage in a conflict somewhere else in the world, the actual legislation is very specific when it refers to a terrorist act. And of course we've got the Terrorism Suppression Act 2002 Section 5, and I'll come back to some of these points, but we have got a very specific guideline that outlines for us very clearly what actions need to be met for them to for it to be deemed a terrorist act. But he raised a very good point. I think that's something that's a wider issue that we should think of, that we should think about and reflect as a nation, and that is, do we want to be encouraging or allowing Kiwis to leave New Zealand to go and engage in any type of conflict, regardless of which side they may choose to participate on? And I think they used the Peshmerga in Kurdistan as an example. And one thing that I can say safely, having spent some time in the region myself, in fact a decade, is that it's a very complicated situation that we're having to face. And if there's 10 layers of complexity to it, then after a decade of having been up there, I could safely say that I probably understand one of those layers. And so a situation that you think on the face of it may present a certain set of circumstances is liable to change and can change either quickly or more slowly over time. And so I think a far better and safer position for us to take as a country is to say and discourage and try and stop any Kiwis leaving New Zealand to go and take up arms and participate in a foreign conflict. But if they do, then we have got very clear guidelines that are available to us under the Terrorism Suppression Act that clearly show us what ingredients need to be met, or what threshold needs to be met for us to understand clearly what a terrorist act is. And I'll just maybe mention a couple of them. And the act is a terrorist act in armed conflict as defined by Section 4.1 under the Terrorism Suppression Act. It is to induce terror in a civilian population, or to unduly compel or to force a government or an international organisation to do or abstain from doing any act. The death of or other serious bodily injury to one or more persons other than the person carrying out that act, or a serious risk to the health or safety of a population. The destruction of or serious damage to property of great value or importance, or major economic loss, and that's actually a very important one. There's a fair bit of debate around that as well, because I'm pretty sure that here in New Zealand, that if we were to suffer a major terrorist act at, say, the Port of Auckland or the Port of Tauranga, then it's going to have a pretty significant negative impact on our economy and our well-being. Not to mention the general huge negative impact it would have on our psyche as a country. Serious interference with or serious disruption to an infrastructure facility, if likely to endanger human life. That's about half of them. So it's actually very, very clear in terms of, if you refer back to the Terrorism Suppression Act 2002, the threshold that has to be met to define someone as a terrorist. And this act is about stopping people leaving New Zealand to engage in acts of terrorism as a terrorist. The other point that I wanted to make very quickly was that when we talked about the visual surveillance powers that are being warrantless powers that have been given to the SIS, and maybe to give an example, a practical example that could possibly occur would be a terrorist fighter that has been active and for whatever reason has been able to buy themselves a ticket on a flight out of the Middle East and arrives in New Zealand and we have to be able to watch that person for the first 12 to 24 hours when they arrive in the country. If we didn't have that
order.
ability...
As a
Oh,
member-
sorry, Mr Chair.
Mark Mitchell.
Thank
you
you,
must
Mr.
go
Chair.
for the call.
If we didn't have that ability, then effectively we could have someone that was in New Zealand, that we didn't know what the full intent of their visit or the reason for coming to the country, and we had no ability actually to monitor them properly or try to gather the intelligence that we required to make that determination. And I think this brings me back to the difference between the Search and Surveillance Act that the police have available to them and the visual surveillance powers that the SIS have. The SIS and the police have got very different roles. The police have to get a warrant, you're right, through a High Court judge with the view to gathering evidence, with the view to taking a prosecution into our court system. Whereas the SIS, their role is to gather information and gather intelligence to try and work out what the intent of that person is. There's never any, there's at no time through that process are they intending to, or can they, take a prosecution or prosecute that person in our court. If during the course of that process it becomes apparent that the person is committing a crime, then of course there's abilities under the legislation to be able to engage the services of the police, and they would probably take over and then use their powers under Search or Surveillance or Crimes Act or whatever they needed to do. So I just wanted to be clear about the fact that there are two very different roles there for our police service and for our SIS service. So finally, Mr Speaker, I just wanted to again reiterate, I've heard very carefully I've listened very carefully to New Zealand First and their leader, the Right Honourable Winston Peters. To be honest with you, I was surprised. I thought that New Zealand First would have supported this bill. I don't know if raising an old piece of legislation that was removed back in 2007 around sedition is a good reason to ignore the situation that we have to deal with presently. But that was the reason put up, and I'm surprised because now we're faced with New Zealand First and the Green Party not supporting this bill. Thank you very much, Mr Chair.